there. Good evening. I hope everybody is doing really well. Welcome to IGDC 2021. Today's Applied Track episode 2 is the trolley problem for 12-year-olds. Before we get into that, let me introduce our speakers for today. We have Morvi Sharma, who is an educator and play designer. She has 13 years of experience designing playful products for young children that try to reimagine learning as an emotional experience with media and research. She's also worked with organizations like Disney, Sesame Street, Byju's, IBM Research, and more. Her favorite part about her work are the endless hours of play testing with kids and listening to their sometimes kind, sometimes brutal, honest feedback. Our next speaker is Bhamini Lakshminaran, who is fundamentally a storyteller who loves video games and has 6 years of experience building kids' digital products like Disney's Byju's, or Early Learn, and comics at QMath. She has also worked hands-on with kids in educational spaces across of India. She reads books, plays video games, and her favorite feature of work, play, and life at large is a well-balanced difficulty curve. They're both from Big Fat Phoenix, and without further ado, let's kickstart this talk.
I hope my screen is visible.
It is. I can see it. Okay, so hi everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. Both Bhamini and I really love the work that we do, and it's really close to our hearts. So it's always amazing when we get to talk about it with other people. Let me start with a very quick introduction. My name is Morvi. I'm an educator and a play designer. And for many years now, I have been working at the intersection of play and learning, designing experiences for kids that center emotions at the core of their learning journey. And through this, I have just been incredibly lucky enough to be able to get to work with some of the best loved and best known kids media brands in the world. So I've worked with Disney, I've worked with Sesame Street, I've worked with Byju's, and many others. I'm one of the co-founders of Big Fat Phoenix, where I also lead learning design. And at Big Fat Phoenix, we're on a mission to design games for children that help them develop value-based decision-making skills. Because we feel games, especially certain types of games, are a really great environment to be able to do that. But we'll talk more about that in just a little bit.
Thanks, Morvi. I am Bhamini. I am a game designer, and like many of you here, I'm sure, I never set out intending to be a game designer, including Morvi, who, by the way, forgot to mention that she studied things like microbiology and went to Harvard, or genetics. So I never set out to be a game designer. What I did was sensible, practical things. Like I studied economics at St. Stephen's College. Then I did some really esoteric things. I studied media and cultural studies at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. But I ended up being a game designer. I've been doing it for the last 6 years or so because I like having fun. Honestly, that's why I do it, because I like having fun. And some of the most meaningful and thought-provoking and life-changing experiences I've had have been while having fun, while reading books or watching television, comic books, and playing video games, which I think have the ability to profoundly shape the way we are and the way we see the world. So that's why I do what I do. I am also one of the co-founders of Big Fat Phoenix Interactive, and I lead game design there. And slide. Okay, it works. So more on Big Fat Phoenix Interactive. We are, surprise, a game design studio. And we design games because we like games. And we design games for kids because we like kids. Pro tip, don't design anything for kids unless you like kids, because you have to work with them a lot. We design games for kids because we think that games have the potential to do and already are doing more than they are given credit for. Because, yeah, kids want to have a good time, they want to be entertained, but they also want to be challenged. They want to be made to think so that they can grow and learn from the experiences. Parents want to expose their kids to anything that'll help them develop responsibility, empathy, and grow up to be kick ass adults. We think that the video games that we are designing can be the perfect meeting point of all of these desires. Kids' desires to be entertained, challenged, parents' desires to expose their kids to good content that helps them grow into awesome adults, and our desire to have a great time and have fun. So, what we are designing is games in which kids find themselves in complex situations where they need to develop skills like responsibility through decision making that then challenges them and helps them to grow.
So, speaking of complex situations and decision making, let me start by asking you all to make a decision. Imagine that you're out for a walk, right? And it's a wonderful day, and you're out and walking, and you're like humming a tune, and you just happen to be walking alongside a set of train tracks, right? Suddenly, you see this gigantic runaway train just like barreling down the tracks towards you, right? There is nobody in control of the train. It's like there is no way to stop it. Down the track, you see 5 people who are actually trapped on the track, and the train is all set to hit them and kill them. There is nobody else around except for you. You look down, and there is a switch right in front of you. If you press the switch, the train will get diverted onto another set of tracks, and the lives of those 5 people will get saved. That's great news. But there is bad news. On the second set of tracks is also trapped one person, but it's just one person and not 5. So, what would you do? Would you press the button and consciously choose to kill one person in order to save 5 other lives? Or would you refuse to make a decision, not do anything, let the train continue on its original path, and let 5 people die when you know you could have chosen to save their lives? What would you do? Anybody? It's tough, right? Like, I know it's really, really tough. And I imagine that nobody's saying anything because you're all like ragged with indecision. So, okay, let me make a decision for you. I kill whom though? That's the question, right? So I'll make a very utilitarian, practical decision, right? And I will say for the greater good, and I will press that button, and I will choose to kill one person, yes, the older lady, in order to save 5 lives. But here's the thing though, it's never as simple in real life, right? What if that older person, that single person, is your best friend, right? And there are random people on the other side. Would you still make the same choice, right? What if it's your best friend on one side, or your mother, or your dog? And what if on the other side are 5 young people who have just survived cancer, and can hope to like live completely fulfilled lives if they're allowed to, right? What choice would you make, right? And it's really tough. There is no, like, I could argue both sides of it till like the train will run over like everybody in the world, right? So what I just described to you is famously known as the trolley problem. It's one of the most popular, the most enduring, and the most heatedly debated ethical dilemmas of our time. And what it sets up for people is a situation in which there are absolutely no right answers, just only major consequences. Okay, and then if you look over here, let's see what's going on in this image, right? What you see, it looks like your typical classroom scene. There's a group of kids who are like all cozily sitting around, like they seem to be playing with toys. And it looks like an idyllic classroom, right? But this is no ordinary circle time. this picture was taken a few weeks ago as part of a research study that we are conducting in partnership with University of Maryland. Okay, you can't see the image. It's a group of like 5-6 kids. They are sitting around and they're playing with toys, right? So this is a research study that we're doing in partnership with the University of Maryland, where if you look closely, what is in the middle of the kids is actually a toy train set. So these kids are actually sitting and talking about the trolley problem, right? So one by one, all these kids, 7, 8, 9, 11 years old, they took the train, they moved it along the tracks, and they decided and talked about whose life they're gonna save, right? And that might sound a little scary, and even I was really apprehensive before the session because these are young kids, right? But it was one of the most insightful discussions that I have ever been privy to. And that's what we're going to talk to you about today, about kids, about games, and about difficult choices that make you think.
I don't have to explain to anyone here that video games can put you in situations where you have to make complex, difficult choices. Your mileage may vary on what you think is a difficult choice. It could be like designing your avatar, deciding where to spend your simoleons in your town, figuring out where to spend your power-ups in Candy Crush. But situations that are really complex, that really make you think, like the trolley problem, tend to arise in role-playing games or RPGs. And the reason RPGs work really well for this kind of complexity and emotional way is because in an RPG, you are playing as the protagonist in that video game, right? So your character's choices are your choices. The experiences the character has are experiences that they have because you are making them have those experiences. If they develop relationships along the way, they are your relationships. So as you go along, you are in control of what happens to your character. So you are responsible for what happens to your character. And I think everyone who has ever played an RPG has sat back at the end of it all and wondered what they could have done differently to arrive at a different ending. Special shout out now to Shivam, who did talk about Witcher 3, because yeah, we're going to talk about Witcher 3. Because this is one of my favorite games of all time. It's a lot of people's favorite games of all time. Because it's a fantastic game. Spoiler alert here, it is 10 years old, so I hope you all have played it. Simply because it's a kick-ass game. If you haven't, cover your ears, hum to yourself. There are going to be a bunch of spoilers up ahead. So in The Witcher, Geralt is basically trying to figure out whether he wants to invest his time, effort, and energy in being responsible, good at his job, being a witcher, or being empathetic, kind, and being a good dad to his daughter Ciri. Ultimately, there is no right answer. Both are good things to do. So The Witcher models that kind of ambiguity that we are talking about in the trolley problem. So for instance, again, spoilers. At one point, right before the big battle of Kaer Morhen, you have the opportunity to have a snowball fight or not with your daughter. So if you choose to have the snowball fight and help Ciri blow off some steam, awesome, you're a great dad, you're really kind. But you're not being particularly sensible or practical or focused on the big battle that's up ahead. Neither one is, though, a bad choice. There is no correct answer. So The Witcher models what happens in real life. Sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do. There is no clear path. But in a video game, unlike in real life, you can always have a do-over.
So I'm sure you're all now thinking about The Witcher and the choices or other role-playing games that you all have played where, like you had to make certain choices if you could have done things differently. I know that when Bhamini was talking, I kept thinking about Fire Emblem, where every time I had to pick a side, I was just like stress text Bhamini at 3 a.m. saying, oh my God, I don't know what to do, right? And let's take that emotion and let's compare that to how we feel when we look at some of the mainstream products that are typically designed for kids. And this is with the caveat that there are some amazing, life-changing products for kids that are out there. But I'm talking about a lot of the mainstream ones that have structurally remained the same for decades. We've all seen them, we've experienced them, right? And the through line I see in these kinds of products is that there seems to be an absolute lack of nuance, and there tends to be an insistence on there be always being a right answer, right? And what do obvious glaring right answers do, right? When you put a very binary black and white situation like, hey, should I kill the puppy or should I hug the puppy in front of kids? What do? They stop thinking. Right answers stop you from thinking, right? I see this and I'm obviously like, hey, I hug the puppy, that's the right answer. And I get patted on the back and I get full marks. But what I do is I don't think, right? And right, and then all of us as grown-ups, as adults in kids' lives, we know that, right? We know that kids are not like that. We know that kids are natural philosophers. Hey, Bhamini, can you move on to the next slide, please?
Yeah.
We know that every single one of us in this room has at least once in our lives been asked a question by a kid that has stopped us in our tracks, right? And more than that, we know that kids are faced with tough choices every single day of their lives. It's the text over here is not very legible, so I'll read it out to you. Don't worry. But again, this stuff that you see over here is a list that we made along with a group of 7 to 12-year-old kids, as part of that University of Maryland research that we have ongoing right now, where we actually got kids to talk about some difficult choices that they have made recently, right? And I'll read out some of my favorites. So 7-year-old Nora talked about how she wanted to buy things with her pocket money. She went to the store with her dad, but she left the money at home. So her dad had to pay for stuff. When she got home, she had to decide whether to pay her father back or not, right? It sounds really cute, but it's also a classic conflict between feeling a sense of autonomy versus I'm 7-year-old, I like free gifts, right? A 10-year-old talked about playing a game on Roblox and where he had to choose between the Nazis and the Americans. And he said he really wanted to side with the Americans, but the Nazis had more guns, right? Again, a really classic dilemma between a sense of loyalty versus a desire to win. We've all been there, right? Or my favorite, this 10-year-old kid called Matthew, who just like put his head down, right? Refused to answer us and said, oh my God, every single day of my life is really tough. And we can all relate, right? Life is really tough. It's tough when you're 40 years old, but it's also tough when you're 10 years old. And we know that kids have rich, complex, nuanced lives. And it's up to us, all the people in this room, the adults, the grown-ups in kids' lives, but also especially us in this room, people who are, many of us are designers. It is up to us, it's our responsibility to honor these tough choices that kids actually have to make every single day of their lives and infuse our designs with them, right? Because all we want as adults is to make sure we do a lot of research with parents, right? And in every single conversation, it comes up that all parents want is that they want their kids to grow up to be thoughtful. They want their kids to grow up to be thoughtful adults. They want them to make good choices, good decisions. They want them to grow up to be good citizens. But the key word here is grow up to be. We lead kids through their most formative years through an absolute lack of agency. We don't give them the space to make any choices, right? But here's the thing. The only way kids can learn how to make good choices is by actually making them. And that's what we're trying to do here at Big Fat Phoenix, is because we feel that role-playing games are a especially amazing environment, a very safe environment for kids to actually experiment with thoughtful, nuanced, tough decision-making and explore the consequences of their actions.
Yeah, and just to address a couple of things, right, that have been popping up in the discussion. Sure, there are a bunch of different ways that we could create these kinds of complex decision-making experiences for kids. We think that role-playing games are one way and a really cool way to have the kids play out these experiences. And again, not all role-playing games, just some of the mechanics that exist in role-playing games lend themselves really well to these situations. So what are those core bits, right? Mainly, ultimately, meaningful choices. Your choices have to matter. Again, it matters a lot the kind of world you build and the characters you design in an RPG. But also, your choices need to have consequences mechanically. Choices need to have consequences to the narrative. So again, if you choose to have the snowball fight, it needs to set you off on the path of spoilers. Your daughter Siri becoming a witcher, and you and Siri both going off on adventures, father-daughter adventures, and having a great time for the rest of your lives. But they also need to be replayable. You need to know that if you did choose instead to trail for the battle, you'll have a different ending. It could set Siri up to become the empress of the entire world that you live in. But different choices lead to different outcomes. What you have to keep in mind, though, is even if you get a terrible outcome, if you get a Rishabh ending, you need to be able to go back in and replay it. But kids need to go back in and replay it within a finite period of time. Because kids can't spend, or at least parents really don't want their kids to spend 150 hours trying to arrive at different endings. So as designers, we need to be conscious of time boxing these kinds of experiences. But the most interesting thing, right, that we think we can do with what RPGs already do is actively surface the social emotional underpinnings while you're making the choices. Anyway, in an RPG, we're tracking all of these choices against parameters in the back end and using them to influence the kinds of endings we wind up with. What if we actually, in that moment, expose to kids some of those parameters? At the moment of having the snowball fight, telling the kid they were kind, or choosing to train, telling the kid they were focused. When a kid is broke but chooses to take the puppy home, you tell the kid that they're being really caring. But when they choose to leave it at the shelter so that the forever family that adopts the puppy eventually actually has the money to take care of it, we tell them that they're being really practical and sensible. This gives kids a value sandbox to play with different kinds of behaviors. So then when they have their do-over and play the RPG again, they can potentially make more thoughtful and informed choices about the kinds of behaviors they want to be.
So what does all of this actually mean for us in practical design decision making, right? What does we've established that the trolley problem is an interesting structural dilemma, right versus right dilemmas make up things. And we know that role-playing games are really great environments to practice that decision making in, right? What do we do to make sure that for us to define the trolley problem equivalent in kids' lives, right? So if you think about the lives of kids, right, there are three spheres that they mainly exist in, right? The first one is a me space. It's a very, very personal space where the themes that become really important to kids are things like a need for privacy, a need for safety, a need for autonomy and control, right? The second sphere is one of kids' relationship. Another really critical space in kids' lives, right? And this is everything to do with their friendships, with their siblings, with their families. And here the themes that emerge that are important for kids to be met are things like loyalty, friendship, respect, and so on, right? The third space that kids exist in, right, which is again really, really important in their lives, is a community space, right? And this could be like a micro space, so things like your football team or your like theater group, but also like larger spheres like kids are a part of communities like their neighborhood, their town, their country, the earth, right? The environment, which is something they have agency over. And there, the themes that become important are things like equality, like responsibility, like fairness and justice, right? All these three spheres are critical for kids' social and emotional well-being. But if you look carefully at the themes here, you will realize that many of them are in conflict with each other, right? We've all experienced the fundamental conflict between self-compassion, which is a very, very me space, versus responsibility, which is a space that deals with others, right? Like, I'm feeling really, really exhausted today. All I want to do is rest. But oh my God, I also promised somebody that I'm going to help them. What do? There is no right answer. We've all experienced it. It's self-compassion versus responsibility. Similarly, in kids' life, if I have to use a very basic example, there is a fundamental conflict between fairness and loyalty, right? My friend cheated on a mock test. They told me about it. It's really unfair to the other kids in the class. Should I do not say anything out of a sense of loyalty to them, or should I say something because it's it's the right thing to do, right? And I'm sure us in the audience can like debate it till the end, and we will not reach consensus because it's a right versus right dilemma. So what we are trying to do is use these kinds of structural underpinnings, and we are working on extracting blueprints of dilemmas out of these, and we are grounding them in relatable situations that kids actually face every day, environments that they exist in every day, relatable sandboxes, I think somebody said in the comment section earlier. And we're using the fundamental mechanics that role-playing games offer us is for kids to be able to experiment with these relatable everyday dilemmas, versions of the trolley problem, and play around with different choices and their consequences.
So all of this thinking and all of this ideating has resulted in what we and our team at Big Fat Phoenix has built together, the Fair Side project. You'll find it on the Play Store, and by the end of the year, it'll be in the App Store as well. So in the Fairside project, you are a part of the idyllic town of Fairside, which has an awesome, inclusive cast of characters that are really fun and interesting to hang out with, and that you can become friends with, and you probably should, because things keep going wrong. They have a lot of problems, and you need to step in and help them solve them. So in the next couple of screens, we will take you through one of these situations that arise in the game, where you have to make a tough choice. In this game, you are vice captain of a soccer team. Yes, soccer, US audience. And you have to make some tough calls in leadership. So this is Matt Numberson, and he's the captain of the team. You're helping him out. Matt says, look at Irfan. He has no idea what he's doing. Irfan keeps missing the ball and chasing after it, then kicking it in the wrong direction. Matt says, but he's having such a good time. Irfan is a really good sport, and he keeps laughing, even at himself. Nobody else seems mad at him. But then Matt thinks aloud, he's a really bad player, but he loves to play. Should we cut him from the team? He asks. Now, you don't want to be mean, but you really want to win. So what do you choose to do? Do you say, look at how bad he is, keep him on the bench? Or do you say, look at how happy he is, let him play? This is a complex situation, however old you are. This is a complex situation that people in leadership, people at their jobs, parents have to face all the time. But situationally, in this context, this is a trolley problem for 12-year-olds. It is a relatable, complex, difficult situation with no right answer. You can choose to do the kind thing, and things will play out one way. Maybe your team won't win. You can choose to do the sensible thing, and maybe things play out a different way. Maybe your team will win, but their morale and just the sense of teamwork will be lower. But whichever way you play it, the awesome part is in a video game, you can go back and try it all over again.
Right. And I mean, like Bhamini said, we really want you, and we want to create a space where we give you the space to actually go back and try it all over again and see what happens now if I do things differently. And we want you to do it with self-awareness, right? So how do we take you from making tough choices within a game to being self-aware about those choices, right? So this is a moment that crops up at like various points in our experience where we actually reference actively the choices that you made in the game, right? So for example, if you decided to give Irfan a chance and let him play in the example that Bhamini just talked about, kindness, this creature over here will crop up and it'll be like, oh my God, you made me so happy when you did not bench Irfan during the game, right? But this other fellow here, right, the sensible one, will offer a counterpoint and they'll say, oh my God, but yeah, sure, but that was really, really impractical, right? And what we're hoping to do through this is for kids to realize that these 4 ways of being are all inside of you. Whether they are in the game or in real life, they are all inside of you, and there is no right way of being, and only consequences, right? And what we're hoping to do with this is, over time, we want kids to start being more self-aware about and start recognizing these kinds of behaviors and the consequences that these behaviors lead to in real life, in their own behaviors, in their families' behaviors, with larger world events in general, right? And also, we want them to that we were hoping that leads to a lot of self-awareness about actual decision making. We want them to develop the mental muscle of thinking about the consequences of whatever choice they make wherever they are.
So now to wrap these things up, right? We've been doing this for a couple of years. Just by going by the discussion thread and the fact that this is the applied games track, we feel like we can assume that a bunch of y'all are interested in designing games which have this kind of meaningful impact and potentially designing games for kids. So here are a couple of things that we've learned on our end that might potentially help you. Top of the list, the most important thing we've learned when designing for kids is that you know nothing. Kids will surprise you because 12-year-olds today are not the 12-year-olds that we used to be. Kids are smarter, they are brighter, they are more informed than we give them credit for. Because firstly, think about it. They grew up alongside digital and interactive technology, so they get it. They know what a video game is supposed to be like. They have really high standards, and they should. Secondly, you can blame or you can thank the internet for it, but kids have a lot more exposure to contexts and themes and situations that we would have earlier considered well beyond their age group. I mean, you still have to be responsible about what you think is age appropriate, but chances are they still get it. Finally, kids seem to just be more emotionally aware. Right now, kids can speak to so many more people than just the kids in their colony or the kids they go to school with. They are exposed to so many things that are going on in the world, so many things that are going wrong in the world, and really sensitive and thoughtful discussions about how they can make things right. So kids are aware and they really want to go out there and do good. Oops. But if one of the things you'll find if you do design for kids is that when you're designing for kids, you are actually just designing for everyone. You don't have to take it from us. Take it from Nintendo. If aliens landed on Earth tomorrow and asked us for a video game or asked us what a video game was, I at least would give them Mario. Mario is ostensibly a game designed for kids. That's what Nintendo intended to do. But ultimately, the bounciness, the joy, the smoothness, just the awesomeness of Mario appeals to everyone, whether you're a wide-eyed 8-year-old or a jaded 29 or 47-year-old, you're still going to fall in love with Mario and have a great time playing it. Because what Nintendo has done is they have gotten to the core of what makes for a joyful experience in a video game. Take it from Pixar. Pixar designs, not necessarily Disney Pixar, but Pixar designs its narratives, again, for kids. But when you watch Toy Story as a kid, it's one thing, it's the loss of a toy. When you watch it as an adult, you can also feel the loss of childhood faith, the act of growing up and being okay with it. Because what Pixar has done is they've gotten to the core of what makes for a good story. So it can appeal to you regardless of the age group. So when you design for kids with kids in mind, when you design with kids, you are more likely to get at the kernel of truth that's underneath everything that you want to understand. Because ultimately, kids are raw, they are honest, sometimes they are brutally honest, and that's what you really need. There is a lot that you can learn from kids, and we know that we have. So yeah, that is our talk. Thank you for listening, and I think there's a little bit of time left, so we can go over some of the questions that have shown up in the discussion.
Yep. Hello, thank you everybody for attending this conversations. Thank you so much for the presentation, both Vamini and Morbi. I think we can all agree there's a lot of talk in the discussion panel, yay! And thank you for interacting with the audience. Let's start with the questions. What do you think are some of the best gaming experiences out there? For me, it could be The Last of Us, for example.
Honestly, what are the things that you enjoy? Because this is so subjective. My mom's favorite gaming experience is Bad Piggies. I think that's the Angry Birds spin-off. And she's a hardcore gamer because she will play that game for 8 hours and she will fall asleep with the phone on her face. So she is a hardcore gamer. So
Right.
whatever you enjoy is the best gaming experience. Do not be gated by what lists tell you should be the best gaming experience.
A little bit more on topic. When we talk about meaningful choices, some kids enjoy violence and destruction for whatever reasons or conditioning. How should adults react to those choices or behaviors?
So I would say first and foremost, don't get like I feel think we as adults like tend to suddenly get like really hyper and like afraid, right? And I think that's also been the whole point of this talk is that kids react well to being in a space where they feel like they're in control, and then if they just observe the consequences of those choices, they know what's what, right? So if kids are being drawn towards violence, and I mean, sure, that's like it's a pretty natural impulse, and we know there is enough content out there like that. Just talk to them about the consequences of those choices. What's going to happen? Have them develop that muscle of thinking about what is going to happen if me or anybody does that, right?
Also, the cool thing is in a video game, you can play evil because it is a safe space. In fact, it is where
Yeah.
you should explore those kinds of behaviors because in the real world, there will be actual tangible consequences. In the video
Yeah.
game world, you can try it differently again.
Yes. Speaking of which, I remember like playing games, especially role-playing games, and the way you have explained that, it's such a safe space because you're playing from a single person narrative. And playing evil always ends up with me moving towards, at some point, moving towards choices that I would normally make, and then realizing, wait, no, that's not what I'm supposed to do, and then leaving that mid-game and then starting a new save file, and then doing things how I would normally do because it got really uncomfortable. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? And I think, especially with a lot of content out there that makes it very easy for children to be in a space where destruction is normal or even lauded. It's basically the popular theory, right? This is what works, and then you would just join that group. Let's go to another question. Is your team using procedural content generation for creating a game with wider scope of choices and their impact?
So our team is developing a bunch of play patterns, but like basically play patterns are the structural cores of the games that we're designing. So we're designing multiple play patterns simultaneously. You won't find procedurally generated content in our product right now, but if we attempt to scale, that is something that we will have to go after.
Right.
I think what we're focused, I think the kind of stuff that we're trying to do, it's really important to get the emotional core right first. And that's what we're like heavily focused on
Yeah.
right now. And that needs a lot of like care and attention, basically.
Right. And the next question is from me. While designing for content like the Fairside Project, what would you consider to be acceptable interactions by children? Or alternatively, what was the process for designing these specific scenarios?
So, if I understand, acceptable interactions is like acceptable choices that
So
can be offered to kids.
yes. So for example, I'm pretty sure you must because of the research you've been showing that you've been doing, and there's a lot of emotional connection that you want to build with the children. How was the play testing? I don't want to use that because it sounds very like product oriented. But how was that phase? How was understanding that this is the feedback you're expecting the children to have, and how did you implement that?
So in our team, what we believe is that there isn't a particular phase of play testing. It is an ongoing series of sessions where we co-design
Right.
with kids, because we don't understand. We are not 12, so we
Yeah.
cannot understand the lived experience of a 12-year-old today. So we are constantly designing things, going out there, having sessions, play sessions with kids,
Right.
getting their feedback, putting it in there, and trying it all again. Because in our team, we believe that if you want to design, you need to be out there and actively talking to the people and working with the people that you are designing for.
Right.
We cannot have a separate like user research, user insights team and a
Yeah.
separate design team.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I think one of the things that like directly related to this that came up really recently is that, so far we've been really focused on designing very, very relatable scenarios, right? Like
Mm.
the dynamics of the school cafeteria and,
Yeah.
like who do I sit next to on the bus and
Yeah.
those kind of situations, right?
Trauma.
But then,
Yes.
yes, exactly, there is drama there.
Yeah.
But when we play test it with kids, especially the kids team kids, the University of Maryland research that I think we've been referencing throughout this talk, we found that kids actively also asked for major situations, right? And they said we want situations which are set in school, but they actually, I'm quoting them. They said we want major, quote unquote, major situations, right? So now we're also kind of trying to expand, like give them like bigger situations where they feel like, oh my God, I'm in charge of like this big thing, right?
Right.
So we're now also moving towards relatable emotions in maybe extraordinary situations, right?
That's actually very interesting. I remember reading about this specific thing in a book named How Stella Learned to Talk, where the author is a speech therapist for children with um, special abilities and learning abilities and disabilities, and how you have, because they are of that age group or because they are of a limited learning capacity, sometimes toys that are developed for them have only limited information and they only press those certain buttons. But the minute you add new buttons or you add new interactions, they're quick, they're perfectly capable of learning. It's just a different form of communication. I think applying something like that here too, that's what you were saying, that totally makes sense. Giving them different scenarios where they can grow and learn. And that's also the thing about learning and moving and becoming, adults, happier or better, stable adults. And that's perfect. I think, yeah, another question. Does the game also show consequences in terms of team losing in case Irfan was picked versus the team winning if Irfan was benched, and how it made the other players or Irfan feel?
So, just like in real life, no single decision usually changes the entire outcome. But yeah, when you make choices, it will show you the consequences of that particular choice. And once the choices are all laid out and once a series of choices have been made, yeah, it'll have an impact on whether, perhaps the impact is on whether the team wins or loses, if that's the objective of the game. Maybe the objective of the game is whether your team likes you and you can build team morale. Maybe that's where the impact is. But yeah, when you make a choice, you have to feel a consequence if anything is going to carry emotional weight for you as a player.
Nice. Are there game genres we should let kids stay away from, say around 7 to 10-year-old children? Somebody mentioned body horror. I agree, but otherwise.
I think there are themes that I would not want to expose kids to. I have one of the founders of our team, Anand Ramchandran. He has a kid, and he would let his son play Halo because in Halo you're shooting, like when his son was a kid, in Halo you're shooting aliens, but he wouldn't let his son play Call of Duty or anything where he was shooting people. So
Yes.
I think parents have a lot of responsibility and grown-ups have a lot of responsibility in the themes that they are exposing kids to. Mechanically, I can't decide for you, but thematically, I have really strong opinions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's the same with games as it with books, right? Like I think as parents, people are really used to curating their literature, right? They have really strong opinions about this is what you should read, this is what you should stay away from. Just do the same for games, right? And it's like an individual negotiation that you just have to participate in.
No, I totally agree with killing aliens versus killing people. It's the same thing with me. Like, put me in a fantasy genre and I can play a ranger and then, shoot a monster down. But then put me in a scenario where I have to, actually kill people. I'm like, same thing, same mechanics, but I can't do it. Yeah, like there's a lot of unwanted, or maybe warranted, can't tell. All right, next question. Is there a good way to provide such heavy moral choices in hyper-casual games?
We are open to suggestions.
Please connect with them later in the lounge or in the lobby. They'll still be available and have questions for you. Where does one find the game? Fairside Project sounds quite interesting. Where does one find the game?
A, thank you. And B, you'll find it on the Play Store, on Google Play Store, on mobile. It should be on the Apple App Store by the end of the year.
All right. Thank you. Those are all the questions we have for today. Before I forget, everybody, please move to the handouts section and fill out the forms. We have a feedback form ready for you. Please send your love to both Bhamini and Morvi for coming here today and thanking them for this conversation. For all of you all, thank you so much for being here and coming here. It's very early for Bhamini, I know, Morvi too. And so thank you so much for coming over and having this wonderful discussion with the group here. I'm looking forward to having you over and over and over and over every time, next time, with more projects in line.
Thanks. I really enjoyed myself. I love the discussion. You guys in the discussion chat window have had some really insightful thoughts and have given us a lot to think about too. So thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.